Hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we have journeyed chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is the final chapter of The Last Battle, Farewell to Shadowlands.
The last chapter of The Last Battle. This is it?
You say this is it a lot, actually, but this is the one time where it makes sense. This is it. You've said that a lot of times when we go into the
Yes,
the
I've been preparing us for the fact that
you've been practicing
but it's
your
also,
lines.
It's not it. It's it for this series.
Just for this series of books here. Well, I am really excited to start off with you. We are celebrating here. We've got our Lewis candle burning. We are drinking VAT 69, imported directly from Scotland to us. Our friend Jack Lewis, who we've spent the last 7 seasons with, enjoyed. And so we're sharing that in his honor tonight.
He definitely enjoyed it once, I think. We
know that he enjoyed it at least once.
He ordered it. He may not even...
You think
Maybe he didn't partake.
He got Walter Hooper to go get it for him, but he just put it on the shelf. He was trying to make him feel better.
And to further complete the picture, we both have several books out. We both have our laptops and a 5-pound note featuring the former Queen of England.
Why do you have that on your... We're in America. I don't think that's ever come up on the show before. But this show takes place in the United States of America.
Well, I was actually hoping that we could do the big reveal and share our true accents. We've been pretending.
It's so nice to see everyone here today.
Scratch that. Don't do that. This
is what I really sound like.
You sound like Adele inhaled helium.
And I don't really have much to say before we jump into this final chapter, other than I will forget if I don't do this. It has been a ton of fun, Phil, to do this with you over the course of the last 6 years now. You know, I came over tonight to record about 2 hours ago. Right. And I think we've completed these 7 books. We've also completed hanging out together for 6 straight years,
right?
Having it in the schedule,
with structure.
Yes, having it in the schedule to be like your wife just shouted down to us from upstairs saying, "Are y'all done?" And we're like, "We haven't even started.
We have only. This is only the beginning.
This is this is only the beginning. The first chapter and the title page, right, have not yet begun." So, but I think legitimately, man, it has been a ton of fun to do this with you, to have this time to dive into these truths and this work with you. I mean, it's not ending at all, but it just, thank you for being my partner in this, because it's been wonderful.
Yeah, right back at you, man. I really appreciate you coming up with this and also doing all the work that it takes to make it happen so consistently. I've never seen a spreadsheet like the spreadsheet that we work off of. And I've also never had anyone who also puts everything on the calendar the way that you do.
I feel like you don't actually like the way I put things on the calendar.
Well, there are a few things we could tweak
Okay, I was like, I'm pretty sure you don't enjoy that.
The fact that there's anything on the calendar at all.
Okay, you at least appreciate that much. All right. The bar is low.
It's been a great built-in way to hang out with a shared project that we've been really pleasantly surprised has taken off, and it's been great.
Well, Phil, let's dive into this final chapter, chapter 16. It's entitled Farewell to Shadowlands, and because it's an even chapter, you have the final summary for us.
I do. Here it is. At Farsight's urging, the entire group of Narnians swim toward a great waterfall and ascend it, going both further up and further in. Everyone runs so fast it is more like flying, until they arrive at Golden Gates. A horn blows, the gates swing open, and a small talking mouse approaches. The friends of Narnia recognize him instantly, and more people appear, including King Urlian, Tyrion's father, and Fledge, until at last some of the oldest Narnians, including 2 beavers and a fawn, are all standing with them. At the very end, Aslan appears and informs them the railway accident was real, and that they are now able to stay forever. The great story is only just beginning.
And that concludes the Chronicles of Narnia. You know, since really the first episode of the show, we've talked about the fact that you are reading these for the first time. You've now completed your read-through of all of the Chronicles.
This is so significant for me because I had the entire collection, the one that I worked with for the first 3 or 4 seasons. The entire collection in one book, and I remember in 6th grade when I received it, I carried it to school and I thought, I'm going to read this whole thing. Mm-hmm. That was, 2003, 2004. Mm-hmm. And now... here we are.
Took you 20 years to read seven
Seven
books
books
written for
For
8-year-olds.
children. The same series that one of our guests read in 2 weeks of Christmas break.
Sure, yes.
In addition to taking care of a job.
Well, I mean, let's start off with some of your initial reactions here to the ending. I think by this point you were not surprised to learn that they're dead, right? Was that a surprise to you?
It was not a surprise. It was nice to have it confirmed and have it said very clearly. That is what happened.
I mean, Aslan uses the word. He says, "You are dead."
Yeah.
He says that's exactly what has happened to you. Did you think you would get such a on-the-nose explanation from him? Or do you think it'd be like you're not in Earth anymore? So just some kind of weird.
Yeah, that is kind of strange, isn't it? But I also think that where they are is strange.
That's true.
But this is a different set of rules.
And the ending we get here, which I'll just come out and say, I absolutely adore this chapter. It's one of my favorites in all of the Chronicles. I said this at the beginning of the season. I cannot understand how you can read this book and be like, Lewis ruined the ending because he killed all the characters. It's like the happiest ending here, right? And
the dream's over. Now the real stuff begins.
That last paragraph, which I think I'll read here when we get to the end. I read it back on C.S. Lewis Day, but I'll read it again here because it's worth repeating. It's so wonderful. Did you expect that we'd have such a finality to what happens in Narnia, but it's so incredibly open-ended when it comes to what happens for all of eternity after this?
I'm not sure what I was expecting.
Okay.
I think I was not thinking, it'll probably end this way, because it kept every book has been so different. There's no predictive pattern to it. Every book has felt very unique in that way.
Any other thoughts just reacting to this final chapter before we dive in?
I definitely felt a sense of I don't know. It's not really grief, but just kind of it felt very significant that this was ending. But it didn't feel like, oh man, I never get to do that again. What's great is we can read the books again. Mm-hmm. We talked about them a lot. we read through them multiple times to get to this point.
Yeah.
And it also, because of the way it ended, I have so much hope, because I know that the characters have stories that go on and on and on. And I think it was sad to have it end, but it also was a very hopeful, joyful moment. Yeah,
it's very bittersweet in many ways. There's actually, I'm not recalling any of it right now, but there's a great little prayer, a little liturgy that my wife showed me many years ago. Actually, no, it's a more recent thing. I'm mixing up my timeline. She showed it to me just in the last few years here.
Is this the Book of Common Prayer, the prayer for ending a good book?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's in the Liturgy of the Ordinary.
Okay.
No, that's the book by Tish Harrison Warren. The book, it's people are yelling at their iPhones right now. Every Moment Holy. It's called Every Moment Holy.
What did I say?
You said the Book of Common Prayer, which was written by Thomas Cranmer hundreds of years ago. I was at least closer. Mine was written in the same century that Every Moment Holy was written. Yep. But yes, there's a prayer for the ending, like sadness upon the ending of a good book, which if I can find that, I'll drop it into the episode's description so people can take the time to read that as well too, because it is it acknowledges that, you read a book. I finish books all the time. I'm sure many of our listeners do too. But there's a difference when you finish a book that you didn't actually want to finish. And especially some of those books that you get enraptured by, you almost read them a little bit faster because of how much you love it. And then you're so sad for it to end. This one's a little weirder for us because it took us 6 years. I mean, this is the longest I've ever spent with any series over such. I mean, there has not been a time in the last 6 years where you and I weren't reading Narnia.
Right.
And for me, that'll continue happening because I do it in my day job as well too. But for you, Narnia is maybe ending for a little bit of time until you read it to your own children, maybe. Or maybe you'll revisit it really soon, but it won't be a weekly occurrence, right? And for me, I won't read Narnia again probably for at least another 6 months, which would be the longest I've gone in years without doing it. Yeah. So there's a little bit of sadness there.
I'm also glad that we're planning to continue because it's the routine of reading it and discussing it that has produced even more fruit than I think I would have gotten just reading it by myself.
Well, let's look here at the first page of this chapter. We have our company of Narnian heroes just sprinting towards this waterfall at Cauldron Pool. And before they actually swim up the waterfall, we get a very interesting conversation between Eustace, Edmund, and Lucy, which I love that it's between our Dawn Treader friends here. That it's Eustace saying how everything is absolutely crazy, and Edmund's just kind of flabbergasted by it all. And Lucy has an interest. She says, "Isn't it wonderful? Have you noticed one can't feel afraid, even if one wants to? Try it." Eustace responds, "By Jove, neither one can."
Right.
I love that, too, that it's Eustace who gets that line because he spent so much of the Dawn Treader and even a good portion of Silver Chair being a pretty anxious, scared guy. Even after his undragoning, when he's with Jill in the Silver Chair, he still has a lot of fear with him. We haven't seen that as much here in the last battle. But I love that it's him who's realizing, there is no more fear. I also wanted to mention here with this line, I found something very interesting in Planet Narnia by Michael Ward, and it pertains to Father Time, I think Saturn here. Now, we actually got an email from one of our listeners, Lindsay. Lindsay writes, "I know we aren't told Father Time's new name, but just for fun, my theory is that his new name would become something like Now or Eternity. Instead of having a new name that refers to the linear course, his new name might refer to the infinite present in the post-Narnian world." So that's one theory. I really like this theory too. Another one, which is proposed by Dr. Ward in Planet Narnia, is that we're getting Father Time's new name. And it has to do with Eustace saying, "By Jove." Do you remember back to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe what Jove stood for here?
I don't.
So Jove is another way of saying Jupiter. We even go back to it's kind of an allusion to, it's almost like saying oh God, right? Kind of this this exclamation. In fact, Shakespeare would use this term, by Jove, in his writing because you couldn't use the Lord's name in vain. And so he would use this, calling out to this more jovial here, meaning like of Jupiter reference for his characters when they couldn't say like, "Oh my God," on in the plays on the stage. And Dr. Ward actually says this because if you remember just a few chapters ago, we talked about Saturn, aka Father Time here, being known as In Fortuna Major, right? In Fortune, right? In Fortuna Major. And Jupiter is Fortuna Major. So they're the inverse, right? Jupiter brings the kingly goodness and Saturn brings that desolation. And here's what Dr. Ward actually says about this in Planet Narnia. He writes, "This is the first mention here, by Jove. This is the first mention in the last battle of Fortuna Major, and we are back, in a sense, to where the Narniad started with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe 6 books earlier. But only in a sense. The second coming of Jove is just that, a second coming, not merely a return to the first advent. We do not find ourselves back in Narnia of the Four Thrones, but have to advance to the Narnia within Narnia. That this journey passes through and beyond Saturn, in Fortuna Major, means that the new joviality is even more joyful than before, more meaningful and poignant, more completely diffused with tragic splendor."
Wow.
I love this idea that the new name of Father Time might just be Jupiter, right?
Yeah.
Might just be, hey, like everything is returning to the way that it once was. And we see this as well when we return to the garden where, right, it all began, right? And it's not the garden kind of reclaimed. It's the garden just without ever having been decimated or even ever having been destroyed or tainted by evil. It's something new and yet something more true. And we talked about this a lot with the forms in the last episode. But I would never have picked up on that had it not been for Dr. Ward, that this "by Jove," which we see multiple times show up during Wardrobe, is potentially an allusion to what Lewis is telling us about Father Time and about this journey we've been on with the Seven Heavens.
Interesting.
So what happens next? They have this conversation, and then Jewel leads them into the waterfall. Tell me about this.
Well, before we move on to that, I did want to point out, I think it's really skillful how Lewis has certain groups interact at certain times.
Yeah.
So you were saying before, this is kind of the Dawn Treader group interacting here. And then later on, we'll see the way different characters talk to other different characters.
Sure.
So the Fawn, Tumnus, is back. Who does he talk to? He talks to Lucy.
I know.
Everything
I love that bookends the series.
is a very clever kind of mirrored reflection of the way it began, where we're now ending with the Fawn talking to Lucy instead of Lucy talking to the Fawn, and it very quickly ends after that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this waterfall. There's a lot of running up it. The dogs can't handle it as well. They look the funniest, it says. There's a very long description. The current is racing away once they get to the top. And then Jewel cries again, further up and further in. If you're not getting it by this point, you should.
Yes,
because
correct.
they're literally going further up and further in. And they are now completely out of Narnia, the true Narnia, and they're into the Western Wild.
And this is that same Western Wild that only, as far as we know, Diggory and Polly have been to before. This is where, on the first day that Narnia was created, they flew with Fledge. My sincere apologies to the Fledge family there for that slip up. Where they fly with Fledge there. This is the direction where we get to that garden, right? And all of this is happening, and I love this mythic remembrance here where Tyrion, who's grown up in the Narnia world, I mean, think about how much time separates Tyrion, the last king of Narnia, with Diggory, who was not a king of Narnia, but who was the first boy ever in Narnia. And he's already standing next to him, and now he's hearing those stories. This would be the equivalent of any of us standing next to Moses or Noah, right? And being like, it really was like this? Was it really like this? And then just talking about it and realizing these are the heroes, right, of the faith. And one of the things I love that Lewis is doing is that's actually our reality. That will be our reality, right, in many ways. And it's hard to fathom what that feels like.
To me, it's enjoyable enough to get to talk to someone who maybe is 60 years older than I am and get to hear about something. And kind of I think one of the more common ones is hearing what an experience was like. A lot of the people that I can still talk to were children during World War II, but just the fact that they experienced the Great Depression in World War II and were alive, and I can hear about that, is interesting enough. Or if there's something significant, especially growing up listening to a lot of interviews with illustrators, and there are some really famous ones that I got to meet, and it was so cool to meet them. But that still is locked within a 80-year time span, and this goes way back. And this is hundreds and hundreds of years that they're getting to connect with. It's also a little strange because they've lived in two different timelines, like two different times, literally. But I think that I don't even think about things like that we may get to meet the people that we read about in the Bible one day. And it sounds kind of crazy. But it also is a really fun idea to think on.
I think so much of eternity, at least when I was actually probably the age when I was first introduced to Narnia, I got so stressed about eternity. I remember being like, I'm just going to get bored. Yeah. I'm going to, and then there was the, like, how old am I going to be? Oh, and then I found out that we didn't have clothes. And I was like, no, I can't. I don't know.
You're not even going to have your body.
Yeah.
You're going to have a new body.
Right. And I remember there were just so many questions and so many legitimately like fears associated with not knowing. I think a lot of us have that. And I think one of the things that I think is really great about reading something like the Last Battle here, and then honestly, I think this feels very Last Divorcee for me too, especially when they get up to the very top of the waterfall and Lewis describes the green grass to see all around him and stuff. I very much think of coming out of the gray town into kind of the foothills of heaven in the Great Divorce, right? And I think what's so fun to play around with the what ifs of heaven with Lewis here, I think it actually takes away some of that, at least that 8-year-old anxiety that I probably still carry somewhere subconsciously, right, in my head. It takes away some of that fear of saying, well, we just really don't know, but we know that it's good, and at least I know that I can just trust in that, right? Like, do I like sit down with Moses and talk to him? How does that work? We see this with Tyrion's father.
Is there an infinitely long line?
Yeah, exactly? Yeah, because there's only one Moses, not like God. There's only Moses is not omnipotent. He's not omnipresent, I think, right? So like that's in heaven, but we don't know exactly how things work. How does it work with my age? How old am I in heaven? Is it one of those things where like, yeah, if you die, as a young adult, like that's awful that happens, but hey, you get to be a young adult in heaven. Whereas like if you live a very old life, you're stuck at 89 years old forever. That's the body you have. These are the things that 8-year-old me. I know that these are not theologically correct things, but I think even being able to read stories like this when you're younger, it opens you up to the idea of, wow, I trust that it is good.
Yeah. I think the trouble for us is that we cannot help but view it through the world that we know.
Yeah.
And the bodies that we know and the constraints that we have. And all those things are going to be different. So the only real hope we have is that we can understand that we don't understand. And that we have
the very Socratic truth right there. Exactly.
Yeah, there's something to look forward to, and if we believe what we have heard, then we have to just trust that.
It's that same truth all the way back from wardrobe, right? It's not, Aslan's not safe, but he's good. And I would maybe just change that a little bit for when it comes to heaven, right? There's a lot that's unknown, but it's good. There's a lot that's unknown, and it kind of is foolhardy for us to try to sit around and figure. I'm not saying that theologians shouldn't think about these and study the Bible and stuff, but for common lay people like you and I, it might not be. I hope that's not a controversial thing to say, but it probably isn't worth our time. It's just to trust that God is good and that what His plan is for eternity is good, whatever that actually looks like. Because even here, Lewis, once they get. Yeah, it's kind of, even when we get to this weird, where they see England later on, and there's different valleys they're walking back and forth on this weird kind of spokes of a wheel. It gets to be very weird,
yes.
Right? And then Lewis just says Aslan transforms, and we don't really know what happens. And then Lewis I can't write it down anymore. And that's that kind of but just trust me, it was really, really good, capital G good.
Whenever he does that, I think if anyone else did that who hadn't proven themselves over so many books,
sure,
it would be pretty frustrating.
It's just a cop-out, you kind of feel like? Yeah.
It is literally your job to write it down. But
actually, literally his job was not to write these books. He had a job as a professor at this point. But
he did have a different...
Oh, yeah.
And we both know how much teachers make, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that he does it skillfully because he gives you enough, and then he stops. When he could make something up and he could keep describing it.
Sure.
But because he leaves it a little bit open, and this chapter ends way sooner than I thought.
Yeah, were you surprised by that?
And I was very surprised. I was surprised when I was reading it, and I was even surprised again when I was writing the summary. I'm taking care to write everything out, and then I look up and I'm looking at the end credits, and they're recommending other books to read if you like this one. And, how many stars do you want to rate? I thought, whoa, that really does kind of come to an ending very quickly. But that's what you get when you only have a cover and a title page.
Yeah. Well, as all this is happening, we get to the gates around the garden as they keep going further up and further in. And right before they enter into the gates, Lewis says this, "And for a moment, none of them was bold enough to try if the gates would open. They all felt just as they had felt about the fruit. Dare we? Is it right? Can it be meant for us?" What a perfect encapsulation of the grace of God here. Can this really be meant for us? This is too good for us. And yet, as soon as they ask this question, this can't be for us, right? There's the great horn, and the gates, they swing open, right? And I love that little that short little question that we hear from these characters, all of whom are heroes in and of their own right, you know, and
but it's so overwhelmingly good.
It's so overwhelmingly good. It's hard to believe. I think what's interesting too is to just wonder in the afterlife, right? Do we realize like how blessed we are, like, or is it just like we don't know what we like? How does, and again, I am such a lay person when it comes to this, so I mean that's a question, right? When we get to heaven, do we know how good we have it? Or do we just not know what bad is anymore? I mean, that sounds a little silly to say. I sound like a freshman in college, like in
what if your
philosophy
blue is not
101?
the same, not the same as my blue?
But I'm sure you love this. Who walks out of those gates first?
Okay, I have a funny story about this.
Okay.
I was very, very, very tired when I usually read late at nights. The last thing I do before I fall asleep. Sometimes I literally fall asleep and I wake up with my Kindle.
Sure.
Pressed
That can't be good for your brain.
No, probably not. No. And I was very tired. The lights are very dim. The screen is very dim, and it's it's kind of a trippy chapter to begin with. They're going up a waterfall and just trying to track with what's going on. And then they get to these gates, and then out walks a moose, and he has this funny thing on his hat. And I thought, we have 3 pages left.
And like he's introducing a new character.
Why now? Of course he's gonna do it. What's the moose's name? I was like, oh, Mouse. It's Reepicheep.
I know.
As a double, like a 1-2 punch, where it was like, oh man.
It's not only is it Reepicheep, not only is it a mouse, but it's Reepicheep.
I remember Reepicheep. I'm so glad we get to see Reepicheep again.
We was like, this is Bullwinkle. He's here he's in heaven. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I would love. And Reepicheep as well, outside of Mr. Tumnus here, is the only returning character that gets to say something. Mm-hmm. He doesn't say much. He says, welcome in the lion's name.
And then he comes up with this phrase, come further up and further in.
No, that's already been said.
It has already been said, but he says it again.
He does say it again, right? He says it again. And of course, Peter and Edmund and Lucy run up to him. Eustace doesn't run up to him. You feel like he's like, hey, we were kind of friends there by the end, but it was a little, I'll let you guys hang out with him first, right?
He might still remember.
He might remember some of the old Eustace. So it's wonderful to see Reepicheep here. Such a wonderful culmination of everything that happened in both Caspian and in Dawn Treader. And if you really are reading them in publication order, it's been books.
Yes.
Since you last read this. This isn't book 5 if you read in publication order. We're talking, it has been 4 books since we last saw this character.
Right.
And I think to see him show up, you probably weren't thinking, I'm sure you weren't, you thought it was a moose, so you weren't expecting him.
I think someone accidentally gave me a heads up. So I was looking forward to it as the last chapter. It all clicked once I saw the middle letter as a U instead of an O, and saw that it was a mouse. But man, what a great balance of bringing back a few old characters, not having everybody say too much, just enough, referencing everyone, but then also moving on. And there's this great phrase. Someone described a book as it was a sequel to a really popular book, and they described the sequel as very hand-wavy. And I thought
What's that? I don't understand. Tell me about. What do you mean?
It just seems like they're really taking a long time to say goodbye. Like, these characters are going away. Like, it's good to see you. Like all this stuff, and there's all these hugs and everything. And this book doesn't feel like that for some reason. And I think it's because of the brevity and because we only get a few lines of dialogue, and it's mainly one key character. A few others are mentioned. It's a full cast, but it doesn't drag on and on. I think my guess is he wrote this whole thing much longer, and he trimmed and he trimmed and
you think so?
Until it was very tight.
I wish, we've talked about before that Lewis, he did a lot of, he wrote by hand most of his books. He used a dip pen for you and I who are very much writing instrument enthusiasts. Mm-hmm. He used a dip pen for the most part. He did some fountain pens in college, I think. But mostly wrote the dip pen. And then his final drafts would be typed up by Warney. Warney would do it, but Lewis had a hard time typing. And all of those drafts, he just would throw away or burn them. And so there aren't as many, whereas like, Tolkien, we have so many drafts, we see all of his working. We just don't have that. Some of those exist, like we talked about Dr. Ward looking at earlier versions of Silverchair. We do obviously have the LaFay fragment, which we'll cover in an episode next season. But I really, I would love to see the early drafts of Wardrobe to see how that changed. And I would love to see the early drafts of the end of the last battle, like you said, to see how did he, was he always like, especially like in the last chapter, was he full on, I'm just going to go Platonic theory and just throw it at you? Was he more subtle originally?
Yeah.
Did Puddleglum come up and have a line? And then did, Corrin come up and have a line? And Erevis have a line? And Bree, and he said, no, I can't do that. I've got to pick one. And it's just, I think Fledge has a short line here, but besides that, we get nothing, right? No, Fledge doesn't even say anything. Polly and Diggory. Fledge says what cousins? That's all he gets, right? Everybody else they're just there. And I agree with you. I think this works really well. In the midst of between Reepicheep and then all of the characters who we'll name in just a moment, we get King. Was it Aurelian? Is that his name here?
Yeah, I said it differently earlier, but I think Aurelian.
We get King Aurelian, who is Tyrion's father. No, Urlian here.
That is what I said. Okay.
Yeah, King Urlian. I didn't have it in front of me, but now I'm looking at it. It says King Urlian, Tyrion's father, and Lewis even writes, this was his father, young and merry, as he could just remember him from very early days when he himself had been a little boy playing games with his father in the castle garden at Cair Paravel.
Man, this paragraph really threw me down I don't know a good idiom for that. It really made me think, because I have very clear memories of my parents when I was a kid, and I was thinking about, my wife and I are about to have our first child, and how I'm very aware of what I look like now.
Yeah.
But it's going to be at least 3 years before the child starts remembering
what you look like,
what I look like in a way that they'll remember for years. And it's pretty wild to think like, oh, I'm going to be different and changing. But what a cool thing to be able to see like a younger version in this setting.
In a much less eternal sense. And I mean much less eternal sense. We've talked about this before. You thinking about your forthcoming child here and thinking about my two kids. It is weird. This is a little meta here. We now have 6 seasons. We've done 130 episodes plus. We've done like 180 episodes if you count all the dancing along we've done too. We're getting close to 200. To think that if our kids ever did, which I'm never gonna listen to Daddy's podcast, everybody. I'm not gonna ever do that. But that is, and just in general with technology and cell phones, like I have a couple of pictures of my father when he was my age. They're around, right? But I still don't. I think of him as being how old he is now, right? I won't say his age, Dad. I won't say your age, but he is 41. No, he's not. But it'll be weird for our children to be able to hear you and I talk as 20-year-olds, now 30-year-olds, and see much more pictures of us because we just have more access to photographs, right? One of the things we actually try to do with our oldest, who sees pictures of himself a lot more than we ever did, is we actually try to hide some pictures from him. We just don't want that can kind of breed pride, right? To see pictures of all the time, and because he'll be like, "Where's me? Where's me? Where's me?" And again, he's 3, so it kind of
the same
makes
reason
sense.
we switched all our mirrors for funhouse mirrors.
So you wouldn't become friends. But it is one of those things, right? Where we're like, how can we be thoughtful in the 21st century about doing that? Because I know that I'm like that, right? Like I probably think more about my appearance now than I did before. Now that I have access to, so many more pictures of myself, right, than I used to. Right, I probably see a picture of myself at least every few days.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it is a little bit different than seeing yourself in a mirror. Is seeing a picture that feels more permanent, a picture, even if I can just click delete really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that does, very much relate to our self-esteem, and in both good and bad ways too. And so I think one of the things we're trying to think through with our own kids is how do we, we want to take lots of pictures of them because they're the cutest kids to ever live. No offense to your child,
my unborn child.
But and so we love having lots of pictures.
Do you want me to get a copy of the ultrasound.
Oh yeah,
again,
to show
just
you.
to-
Okay, look how cute this baby is. I know.
Great skull.
But I also at the same time, don't want my kids to become. I want them to be confident, right? And I want them to be, sure of themselves. But I don't want them to be full of themselves, right? And that's such a hard line as a parent to walk, right?
Yeah.
But this is so great that Tyrion gets to see his young father, right? And that's just as I think for both of us as fathers now, it's weird for me, and I'm sure weird for you too, to envision what it is. It's hard for me to envision my son when he's even at like an adult age, right? Because we're in toddler years now.
Yeah.
So, but my dad and I, we were just talking today. I went over to my folks' house, and my dad and I were talking. Harris was playing in the other room, and we were chatting for a long time, and just think about how great it is. Like, this is my friend, right? Like, my dad is I know you feel the same way about your dad too, right? But there still is like a 30-year gap between us, right?
Yeah.
That is a little bit different. To imagine what this is like for Tyrion to be like, there is no gap. It's just like we are friends, but have this deep paternal, right, bond, right?
It's, like, my connection with my dad it is a friendship, but it's so much more than that. It's a unique relationship, and
Yeah.
there's only like I don't have that with anybody else.
Sure. And
Yeah.
and there still is that very good hierarchy, right? There's the good hierarchy of your father is wiser. My dad is wiser than I am, right? He's a better Christian than I am. Your dad is too, right? Like and there's that kind of relationship. But it's almost like the physical forms of our fathers being older help remind us of that. It would be weirder, right, if our dads are like our age and they still have all of that wisdom and all of that maturity that we do. But then when we get to eternity, like, wait, like, it's all of us at our oldest and our best. And I would hope, right, that as I get older, I hope that I'm, more like my own father, right? I know you hope you're more like your own father. And so what is it like when you're father, and for anyone else, it could be mothers or whomever, they're at their full maturity and at their most Christ-like, and you were also at your most Christ-like. That's almost a new relationship, because all of my relationship with both of my parents, right, is always about wanting to be more like them.
Yeah, the thing that I think could kind of connect it to is, I think work is very different, because unless some people do work with their parents, I guess, but for me, I work with people who are within a range, and there are people that are way ahead of me when I start working. But then after a few years, that difference is less noticeable, just because everybody kind of evens out. It's similar to when you're 10 and you have, like, you're over at someone's house and there's someone who's 20. It just feels like they are literally an entire lifetime away from you.
Oh, sure.
But then I've seen people who are 60 and 70, and they don't seem to feel that same difference.
Yeah.
And it definitely, anything past 23, like once you are out of school and then you have started doing life stuff, the differences become a little more blurred more quickly. Where, like, when we were 28, we were hanging out with people who were 33, 34, and it didn't feel that different where it would have if we were still in school.
Great book recommendation for you. It just started last week, so I'm new to it, but I've read some of his other work and I've always enjoyed it. Jamie Smith, the Canadian philosopher who writes, James K.A. Smith is the name he writes under.
See the guy who played Bail Organa?
That's Jimmy Smith. The amount of people who just know that why do we know Jimmy Smits played Bail Organa in episode 2, 3, and in Rogue One?
Because I saw In the Heights and I thought, oh, Bail Organa's in this.
He's also in Dexter season 3 randomly as well too.
Oh,
But I mostly also know him as Bail Organa. I think he has maybe 5 lines across the 2 prequel movies, and that's who he'll be for the rest of his life to me.
And so it is.
Do you know that is? I'm glad that we got some Star Wars naturally in here on the final chapter of Narnia. That boy, that Jedi who is.
It is.
This
George
isn't fun because you already know it.
Lucas's son.
Do you know what his Star Wars name is?
You've said it before, but I don't recall.
We've talked a lot about Star Wars names. His son's character name here is it's like Zed. Oh, I can't find it right now. You just talk for a second while I look it up.
Well, if you want, I have a I have a DK Publishing Star Wars The Complete Guide, and it has a picture of Yoda with a light up lightsaber, but the battery needs to be replaced that I could go get for you.
It's too late because I've already gotten it here.
I was just stalling.
His name is Zet Jukasa.
Jukasa.
Zet Jukasa. And I believe, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's like pretty similar to whatever his real name. Yeah, his name is Jet Lucas. So Jet Jukasa is kind of similar to him.
If you think this doesn't connect, this is actually the kind of conversation that led to us doing a podcast together.
Yes, the podcast.
We were going back and forth saying, well, do you know what year this came out? And then if I got within a year, he would go, oh, maybe we should do a podcast.
There is 100% another timeline in the multiverse where you and I have a Star Wars podcast, right?
Oh,
I mean, we kind of have a Star Wars podcast right now.
It's incognito.
We haven't told everybody yet, but season 9 is just, we're going full Star Wars books. That's all we're doing.
And deep cuts only.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Only
like the ones where Darth Vader's helmet's like a little too pointy for some reason. I always wondered why they did that.
I never even got to tell you about the book recommendation here for both
of
you.
Oh, yeah. Jimmy Smits wrote a book.
So James K. Smith wrote a book. It just came out last year. How to Inhabit Time. Understanding the Past, Facing the Future, Living Faithfully Now. Looking a lot at time and how to actually live well in time. And it has been a book that has... I'm only about a third of the way through it, maybe even less, maybe more like 20% of the way through it, and really enjoying it as we think through, what does it mean to be in time? That's the temporality that we exist inside of, right, is something that is actually, if you think about our lives as Lewis says in The Weight of Glory, us being eternal is a very short blip. Like our lives here on earth that exist inside of time will be over just like that. I mean, Lewis says that here at the end of this chapter, where as eternity begins for these characters, he's like, all right, we haven't even started chapter 1. You lived a life. For characters like Professor Kirk here, he lived a full life in England, and that's still not, we haven't even gotten to chapter 1 yet. I think a book like How to Inhabit Time is just a great way for anyone who really, especially and even for many of our listeners who are maybe not religious, who are not Christian, but are just interested in the idea of time from either religious or even a non-religious perspective. Well, I should not say that because this is very clearly, Smith is a Christian. He's writing from a Christian perspective, but he's looking at it across all of human history. And I think any of our listeners who are just intrigued by that idea, great book to pick up and read, maybe between seasons while we're waiting to come back with season 8 here.
Yeah. So
this all happens. We get the former king of Narnia, and then we get our long list. We get Fledge that comes out. We see Glimfeather, who gets name dropped before Puddleglum, which I thought was a little offensive to Puddleglum, but we'll stick with it. That's okay. We get King Rillian, the Disenchanted. We get his mom, who is still unfortunately not named here,
and his mother, the Star's daughter.
That's a little frustrating, right? That Caspian's wife doesn't get a name here. And then we do
Maybe
see
she's like one of those stars that they still haven't designated a name with because someone hasn't filled out that form.
You haven't even bought it yet.
Right.
So, all right, this is it. Here's some of your homework assignments to the listeners. Please email us. All right. What is Caspian's daughter's name? And I don't want it to be a normal name. Name it like you would name a star, where someone's like, this star is named Jackson's 9th birthday. Just what is her name? And then Caspian is here as well too. We see the Lord. I was surprised. Drenian and Byrne both get included in here for being relatively not all that important. I love Don Treader, so I'm happy they're there. One thing I noticed, though, Byrne's name spelled with an E at the end. Does your copy have the Lord Byrne, Berne?
It does.
I looked it up here. In the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the Lord Byrne is spelled Bern.
Oh. All right, Michael Ward. Figure that one out.
So, very interested in this. I don't have... Here, you talk for a second. I see your copy on the bookshelf. I'm going to go grab it and see if this is just a Kindle problem or not. So talk a little bit about some of the other people we see here.
Ooh, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the Kindle is you can report an error. For example, I was reading a book recently, and it said that the moon landing, I knew that was going to happen. He just pulled one book, and then, like Jenga tiles, or Jenga.
I'll get in a minute.
all
I'll go back over there and grab it.
It's
Keep
probably
talking.
breaking the spine. I read a book, and it said that the moon landing happened in 1965, which is off by 4 years. So I reported it, and I said it was in 1969.
Nice. Well done. Well,
It's like throwing a pebble into a waterfall.
So I'm looking at it right here. It's on page 764 in your ginormous book here. And here it is. It says here, the Lord Drinian and the Lord Berne. Berne.
Huh.
Interesting.
Now we need your 1970s copy.
Yeah, I would love to see if that's always been incorrect. I would assume, we're definitely not the first people to ever notice this, right? That if it has been in all of the copies, I'm sure Andrew Lazo could check one of his like first edition copies that he has to see if that's the case. And if it is the case, is this just the way that Lewis does world building? Is like, what was that guy's name again? just burn something, just throw it. Was that an E or not?
Well, I didn't.
Or was it on purpose?
I didn't think about this until I read Dune, but it is relatively difficult to handwrite everything or even type it on a typewriter and keep track of all the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've been really fortunate that most people, like the really, really good authors, the ones that you keep reading for a while, they either knew how to do it from the beginning or someone fixed it really early on.
Yeah.
For example, it wasn't really until the year 2000 that we had a correct copy of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, really?
Because he did such different...
I didn't know this.
Yeah, he did such different spellings that sometimes someone would think he misspelled it, but he intentionally spelled it a certain way. And then he would notice it and he would have him correct it. So it took a really long time for them to like go back and make sure this is actually the way he wanted it published. But in Dune, there's only one kind of continuity error where the emperor character is portrayed as very old at one point and then much younger at another point.
I don't remember this in Dune.
Yeah, that's kind of the only mistake that the author made in terms of like the world building, which is pretty cool. He built this entire world from scratch and then only had that one tiny little error.
What's the emperor's name? Do you remember his name?
I don't. But it's Christopher Walken.
I think it's Sheev Palpatine, right? Is that
Yes.
is that the emperor's? I still can't believe this had to have come up on the show before that they.
It has. We've talked about it.
Just name him Palpatine. Why is his name Sheev? That's the least cool name you could think of. I don't remember what the emperor's name is in Dune. I know he's the Padishah emperor. Like that's part of his title. I don't think that's his name.
Yeah.
I know Irulan's obviously his daughter. But that's all I know. This is not the Dune podcast, and it will not become the Dune podcast. As I have said many times before, the books have really cool worlds. I do not care for Frank Herbert's prose.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we haven't talked about this. They're not my favorites.
Yeah.
I read the first two. I enjoyed them. I don't know that I would ever revisit them, and I don't think I'm going to continue to Children of Dune.
Yeah, it's definitely the world that is attractive and just the sheer amount of detail. And it's similar to Lewis where he's mixing a few different things.
Sure.
He's well researched in the things that he mixes together.
Well, and some of the themes are really great and interesting. Yeah. And I don't know. I have a love-hate relationship with the way that he does third-person omniscient, right? So there's that one really great scene in the first book where they're all at that dinner table. It's before, any of like Leto's assassination or any of that stuff. So it's got to be, I don't know, in the first third of the book somewhere. And all of these people are plotting against each other, and it's mesmerizing the way that Herbert goes, like you hear this character and then like the very next paragraph you're getting this character. I mean, a lot of authors instead, something like a Robert Jordan type, right? You have each chapter, he might have a lot of characters that he follows, but each chapter is from one character's point of view, right? Like you might have Moraine here, or maybe Rand, and this is in Wheel of Time, right? Or you have, something like, in like Harry Potter, where you only get things from Harry's perspective or something. But Herbert is able to just jump from character to character all within like a paragraph or two, which is interesting and I think takes a lot of talent, but it is overwhelming to me. And so I can easily see why people love his prose, but it almost, as much as I'm impressed by it, it almost gets it makes me stressed, and so I have a hard time spending, especially like Dune Messiah is like that too, when you have this group plotting against Paul, and I'm intrigued by all of their different reasons for wanting to do this, right? All their motivations, but I'm also overwhelmed by all of them too. So
yeah, it's something
that's why I read all this children's literature instead.
It's a little more relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I loved was the psychology behind different things. So a character would say something, but then you would hear their thoughts, and then you would see their actions, and that combination of all three together was really incredible, and it was a very efficient way of showing you what these characters are actually like. And they did it pretty well in the movie, I thought, too, where because of the perspective, you could see an interaction happening between two characters, but then there are secret hand signals happening. Because of where you are, you can see the hand signals, and then you also see the person's reaction to the hand signals. And there's a second conversation happening at the same time.
Yeah. Well, let's keep on moving here. So all of our characters come back together. We see Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. We see Tumnus. We hear about how the jokes are great because you haven't used them in a few centuries, which is wonderful. And so they get to see each other. They go towards the thrones of King Frank and Queen Helen. And then we hear that some time has passed, or maybe no time has passed. Lewis says about half an hour later, or it might have been 100 years later, for time there is not like time here, Lucy stood with her dear friend, her oldest Narnian friend, the Fawn Tumnus, looking down over the wall of that garden and seeing all Narnia spread out below. Now, just before we get into all that they see here, again, that line of just, it might have been 30 minutes, it might have been 1,000 years. Who knows? And it doesn't matter. Right. That's the kind of stuff about eternity that just weirds me out, man. Like, I don't know. It makes me feel weird.
It's interesting you say that. I think one of the most uncomfortable things that I felt as a kid was when I started to understand the concept of infinity and eternity.
Sure.
And I remember trying to think, okay, like how big would an infinite number be, or how long will eternity be? And it's very uncomfortable. You just you can't sustain that for more than maybe a few seconds, a few minutes at the most. So it's understandable why that weirds you out.
Well, tell us what they now see here.
Yeah, they're looking down over this wall of the garden, and they're seeing not the old Narnia. They're seeing all of Narnia spread out below. But it's described in this way that makes it unlike anything you've seen before. So this paragraph says, "But when you looked down, you found that this hill was much higher than you had thought. It sank down with shining cliffs, thousands of feet below them, and trees in that lower world looked no bigger than grains of green salt." That's just, it sounds like when you're looking at it, it's even, by focusing on it, it's even more further away, but also grander than you could picture. And I wonder if we're kind of getting into some relativity stuff where by looking at it, you're also experiencing getting away from it.
Well, yeah. And, in that too is that really great idea that comes at the end of The Weight of Glory. It's a very famous one, but it's worth, re-mentioning here, which is that idea that all of the characters we have met, and we see this as we think about Narnia, because, Lucy looks out and she sees England, the real England, the true England, right? And there's that idea that Lewis introduces, or at least that's where it's most famous maybe in The Weight of Glory, that, you've never met a mortal person in your entire life. Do you remember this line?
No.
Okay, I'll find it real quick and I'll read it. Lewis says, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play, but our merriment must be of that kind which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption." And for us as Christians, what we believe is that every person we interact with is destined for immortality, is immortal. The things that we think will last forever, I'm not just talking about countries or even like our country. We did reveal we're from America today, so we're very young. We're a baby
North America.
country, right? Yeah, North America. We'll just give our continent today. That's all. I have a PO box to share it later. So, but even things. We talk a lot about great books on this podcast, and think about things like the Iliad, the Odyssey. Think about Gilgamesh, something so incredibly old, but still temporary, not immortal. There will be a time, right, on this earth where no one knows Gilgamesh. And it might be that because everyone's dead, no one's here, but that is a mortal thing, right? But the people who wrote Gilgamesh are immortal, right? And that's what we believe as Christians, that your soul is a immortal thing. And that's what Lewis is talking about here. And it's as Lucy is looking out around, it's just taking in all of that, all of the immortality that exists. That's such an interesting way, and I think that's why this line by Lewis is so potent and it just comes up so often, is because it really changes the way that we right now think and behave and act. As if even though this is just a book here, right, and even though this is just not an allegory but a supposal, right, it helps us comprehend the weight. And that's funny. That's the name of the sermon. Like the weight of that glory, right?
It also, to me, it informs how we interact and how we move through this world right now. If you have that perspective of this is but a blip compared to eternity, it really puts things in perspective and may change what you choose to do with the time.
It's hard. You always want to be careful because we don't want to say, people go through really dark, difficult things on earth. And I'm sure you and I have, and I'm sure many of our listeners have had the unfortunate conversation of, with someone who says, well, it's fine because we're all going to go to heaven one day, or, because you love Jesus, so it'll all be made right one day. It's like, well, that doesn't really fix the legitimate pain that exists right now, right? And I think what's a good news is that Lewis doesn't. If you go read The Problem of Pain, that's not how Lewis handles this. He doesn't just say, "Well, suck it up because you're in more." Like, if you had a better understanding of time, Phil, you would understand that this is just a little blip on the radar, and you would easily be able to get through this. No, like we actually, and here we are in Advent for you and I recording right now, that we have a God who became human, who was incarnate, right? And actually understands what that pain is like to be in time and to feel those things in the moment and know that just simply saying, oh, well, things will all be made right one day doesn't really make the pain go away. It doesn't change the truth that things will all be made right one day, but it doesn't ease that burden really. I think that's one of the things that, especially many non-Christians might be just kind of roll their eyes at, is because that has sometimes been the way that we as Christians have responded. Well, I know that this horrible abusive thing happened. I know this terrible tragedy occurred, but God's going to come back one day. So just kind of suck it up for right now, Yeah. Which is actually not what God says to us. That's not how we're supposed to act. We're supposed to realize that those things do matter. And the tension is that they do matter right now and they won't matter one day. Right. And both of those truths are true.
At the same time. Yeah.
Well, Phil, we've got to keep going further up and further in. Here we are at the very end. Lucy and Tumnus, they're looking down at Narnia. And as they're doing this, Aslan begins appearing. A procession occurs. And we get a short conversation between Aslan and Puzzle, which I'm curious, what do you think was said here? Puzzle's ears go down, so something not so great must have happened, but then they perk up. What do you think Aslan said to him? We never find out.
We don't know. Probably something along the lines of, what you did is wrong, and now it's okay, which is what he does with a lot of characters.
Yeah.
He acknowledges what happened, and this is so important. I know he didn't, we don't actually know what he said, but I think we can guess what he would say based on what he said to other characters. Mm-hmm. And it's the fact that he does not go, oh, it's no problem. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
What they did was wrong, and it caused pain and hurt. But also, it is forgiven
Yeah.
and it is okay now. And so that's my guess.
Yeah.
Based on what he's done for every other character. And maybe he's like, hey, if you have a sword, you should clean it, just to remind him. And
we that made me think of this. We were just talking about fatherhood. One of the things that my son has really loved doing, unfortunately, during this Advent season, is he likes kind of scooting between the wall and the tree. We've said many times, he's like a cat. Like, this is not a good idea. You're going to break something, and it also knocks all of the little the leaves off the tree, right? And
my dog does the same thing.
I'm sure, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like a pet sometimes. And just yesterday, he broke an ornament, and it's not that big of a deal. It's like, I wasn't even that upset about it. I was more concerned he was going to get hurt or like step on it or something.
Yep.
And I go up to my son. I say, buddy, I have told you, this is why I have said over and over again to stop doing this, because I said you're going to break something. And it was a great moment because I actually felt, good about the parenting that Anna and I have done, because like, it's okay because you forgive me. And I said, yes.
Yep.
It's actually not okay. It's not okay, and you're forgiven. I just said that sounded weird, but it's not that what you did was okay and you're forgiven. It's what you did was not okay, and because I love you and because there is grace and mercy, you are forgiven. Mm-hmm. But it's really important that you don't think those two things are the same thing. When I forgive you, and I said, you're clearly forgiven, son, but what you did wasn't okay. You disobeyed me. I've said multiple times not to do this, and you've broken this thing, and it's totally not the end of the world, but you were disobedient.
Right.
Of course you're forgiven, but it's not okay. And I think that's that kind of godly judgment that Aslan continues to show throughout all of the Chronicles. And we see that in Jesus. I mean, maybe you can think of Jesus, John chapter 4, right? Jesus with the woman at the well, where Jesus, or is he even with like Zacchaeus, right? Something that, we learn in the earliest days of Sunday school, right? Jesus saying, what you're doing is not okay. Of course you're forgiven. Of course I love you, right? But I actually want to call you out of that, because just like with my son, it's not that I don't want you to play by the tree because I want to ruin your fun. It's because I actually do know better. I know that this doesn't end well. It ends with a broken ornament. And thankfully it didn't end with any, cut feet or bloody fingers, but it's me trying to do what's actually best for you.
Right.
And I think you're right. This conversation with Puzzle, Lewis reminds us here right at the very end of the Chronicles. He reminds us that God doesn't just come with only good news for people who only have to hear good news. He comes with good news, but the good news exists because we're broken, right? The reason it's good news is because we are in need of a Savior, right? Because things weren't okay, but the good news is they will be okay. They will be made right.
Right.
And from there, Aslan turns to them.
Yes. Shortly after this, are you talking about the part where he's talking to Lucy about how...
He does, yeah.
Yeah, everything... He says the further up and the further in you go, the bigger everything gets. The inside is larger than the outside. That was one of my key highlights that I wanted to be sure to share. Just what an amazing concept. And it builds upon what we learned about the stable door, where the stable door is the same way, but this is now the entire thing. And it seems like it... Not only is it going to go on forever, but it's going to continue to expand. So it's not like you have forever to explore finite.
No, it just keeps going further up and further in.
Yeah.
I think
it's also fascinating that this lines up with our understanding of just how everything, like the universe is still expanding and time is going forward too. It's just, it really seems to match pretty well with the understanding that we're gaining of
Lewis,
how the world works.
Seems to be scolding people like 8-year-old me who were worried that heaven would be stagnant. And what we see here is, and think about even the imagery of all the sprinting and running. This is anything but stagnant. It's not you made it to heaven, now just sit and be bored for eternity. It's you made it to heaven, let's keep going. And I think that is hard for us to understand, because when we think of keep going, we always do it through the lens of time. And now it's let's keep going, time no longer exists. And that's the part that we just cannot comprehend.
Yeah. There's been a lot of that going around this chapter.
Phil, I actually read this on C.S. Lewis Day, but I would love for you to maybe read for us those last 2 paragraphs there as we come to an end here.
I'd love to. Starting with there was a real...
That's probably a good place for us to go.
So for context, in case you haven't read this last chapter recently, Lucy is afraid of being sent back.
Yes, because
they're having such a good time.
Aslan always has sent them back, and she's worried.
Yeah, historically, that is what Aslan has done. And Aslan's response is, "No fear of that. Have you not guessed?" Their hearts leaped, and a wild hope rose within them. "There was a real railway accident," said Aslan softly. "Your father and mother and all of you are, as you used to call it in the Shadowlands, dead. The term is over. The holidays have begun. The dream is ended. This is the morning." And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world, and all their adventures in Narnia, had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last, they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before.
Don't you just want to say amen after that?
It has that.
It feels like it just you gotta
prayer.
You just gotta say amen. It feels like a prayer there at the end, right? And that is how the Chronicles of Narnia ends. Any final thoughts on that last paragraph or two before we go to some listener feedback? Other than, wow, it's incredible. I can't think of a better ending, right?
Yeah, and trying not to get my voice to catch. I love that there's a happily ever after, but it's not the last word.
Mm-hmm.
There's a happily ever after, and then the story keeps going.
Yeah.
But we're done with our part that we'll get to experience now. And I think that's, literally like one final genius stroke to end all this is that they live happily ever after, but that's not the end. And even the fact that there's a sentence after that keeps explaining that there's more to come even after happily ever after.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to that. It's just so beautiful and wonderful. I think it's just time for us to move on to listener feedback here.
Yeah, what you got?
So we have an email. We are actually recording this. There are no other episodes. We just released chapter 15. We kind of, as we always do, we spread these out. We record a ton in advance, and then the last episode of every season we record after we've released the second to last episode.
We do it for the adrenaline rush.
It is kind of fun though, because what's interesting is as the season is ending for our listeners, it's also ending for us too. Whereas we recorded those first like 7 or 8 chapters before anyone had even heard chapter 1. So now we've actually gotten to journey along with our listeners all the way here to chapter 16. And, in the last chapter, we talked about Emeth, and there was a lot of discussion over what Lewis was doing there, if it was good, if it was bad, what was happening there. And I actually have an email that I want to read. It's from our listener named James, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to read some of it, and then it actually lined up with what I was going to put in as an addendum here, but what James wrote was so much better than anything I was going to write that I'm just going to mostly focus on his email here. So I'll read it for us. It says, "Dear Daniel and Phil, I hope you're well. I really enjoyed listening to your excellent podcast and just wanted to share some brief thoughts with you on the question of Emeth, which seemed to perplex you both. In short, I am not sure the case of Emeth presents as much of a problem for Lewis's orthodoxy as you guys seem to think, and nor do I think that it demonstrates a leaning towards universalism. In fact, there is a time-honored teaching on this topic from within my own tradition, the Catholic Church, which I'm sure you'll agree has been around for a long time. Lewis was never a Catholic himself, of course, but he had a notable friendship with prominent Catholics, including Tolkien, and leaned towards Catholicism in notable areas such as purgatory, so it's possible that he was influenced here to some extent as well." I'll pause for a moment and say, just an episode or two ago over on Pints with Jack, David, Matt, and Andrew talked about the long-held debate over whether Lewis would have ended up as a Catholic or not. What was really interesting, and I go for any of our listeners, I'm sure many of them already do, but go listen to, it was maybe the first episode of Letters to an American Lady, maybe it was the second one, but there's still a debate whether would Lewis have stayed Anglican as there were some big changes in the Anglican communion in the 60s, or would he have maybe crossed the Tiber, or would he have gone towards Orthodoxy? I mean, it's really unclear what would have happened, but I just think that's interesting as we get this email from James here. James continues, it may seem strange to say that the Catholic Church, which, if anything, makes more exclusivist claims than our Protestant brothers and sisters, to be more open to this kind of scenario. Nevertheless, that the apparent tension is resolved by drawing a distinction between the rightness or wrongness of an act and one's personal culpability for committing it, and also by drawing a distinction between what or who saves and the possible ways of assessing that salvation. And I will say, I do think that both you and I growing up in Calvinist traditions, I think probably plays a big influence on how you and I see the story of Emeth. Then James continues, Jesus said, no one comes to the Father except through me. Catholicism, and I believe Lewis, agrees completely with this statement. Anybody who rejects Jesus cannot be saved. Thus, there is no basis for universalism. But there are certain groups of people who do not have a conscious allegiance to Jesus, but who don't seem to be personally at fault for that lack of faith either. Consider, and he gives 5 groups here, those who die in infancy, those outside Israel who died before Jesus came, those in modern times who live in cultures which have still not had a clear presentation of Christian beliefs, those who have been so badly mistaught Christian doctrine that they have a completely false understanding of it, and those who have been so horrifically abused by a supposed Christian that their perception of Jesus has been warped and wounded beyond their control. It would be hard to find someone who believes that all of the above people are automatically condemned. I think you and I maybe grew up in traditions, though, that did kind of hold to that. You know, I think especially if you live in kind of what we might call this more double predestination view of theology, that kind of was some of the water we swam in for a bit. Maybe some of our Calvinist brothers, who I know many listen to this, would feel differently, like to give their thoughts as well too.
Well, my wife pointed something out. She said that, because I was a little hung up on that everyone it has to go through Jesus, but she pointed out that we don't necessarily know what that looks like. So we could still get to the Father through Jesus in a way that you and I are not aware of, which is an interesting perspective.
That's true. It's interesting. He then continues here, James does. He says, the common factor is that at the point of death, they had so little knowledge about Jesus that they never had the opportunity to follow him. The Catholic Church calls this invisible ignorance and considers that in some cases for those not explicitly Christians, this can remove the blame for not being a Christian. Those in such cases may, but are not guaranteed to, be saved by cooperating with whatever grace God has made known to them and their culture, like the Gentiles and the law unto themselves that Paul mentions in his letter to the Romans. This is not universalism, because the surest and only way to be saved is through the explicit faith in Christ, because many of the people in invisible ignorance may instead resist the God they do not know instead of trying to follow him, and because those who die having done this will receive no second chance at everlasting life. As such, I think it was by no means certain that Emeth would be saved, but that the one interpretation of his inclusion in the new Narnia is that, not knowing any better, he served Aslan despite naming him Tash, and resisted Tash under the guise of Aslan. What's in the name, after all? If he thought of Aslan as just an evil spirit, and Tash as the one creator and rightful lord of the world, there is such a strong case for the idea that he simply got their names mixed up. I hope that makes sense. For myself, the idea gives me joy and hope for those who have already died, and for those whom I know I will have no chance of reaching before they die. For what it does not do is diminish, rather it magnifies Christ's saving power, not removing the imperative for preaching his name all over the world and inviting everyone to follow him. Best wishes and God bless, James H.
Wow, thanks, James. That's a really well thought out perspective.
It's a really wonderfully well thought out perspective, especially for two Protestant podcasters here too. And I did want to share just a little bit, though, on top of that, of what I had read in actually another Catholic here, Joseph Pierce's book, Further Up and Further In. And he had talked a little bit about this too, and had talked about if purgatory potentially also could explain what he called Emeth's baptism of desire here. He explains that Emeth's inclusion in Narnia through the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that every man who is ignorant of the gospel of Christ and of his church, but seeks the truth and does the will of God in accordance with his understanding of it, can be saved. It may be supposed that such persons would have desired baptism explicitly if they had known of its necessity. Right? Pierce goes on to then explain that Christ's words in John 14, what you just mentioned, that no one comes to the Father except through me, can still work in this theological framework through the existence of purgatory, which we know that Lewis at least flirts with, if not wholeheartedly accepting. So appeals to this baptism of desire aren't even just unique to him. I won't read it right now, but Paul Karkanen talks a little bit about this in Unlocking the Wardrobe. He talks about this desire we have of wanting and seeking truth and simply having names mixed up. He talks about that as well too. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to pick this email to share on listener feedback is because here we are, we're ending season 7, the final chapter of The Last Battle, and it feels like we have so much more to still discuss. Because I don't know about you, I feel like this conversation, even with James's wonderful email and with Paul Karkanen's fantastic book and Joseph Pierce's book, it feels like there still are maybe some questions about what exactly does that look like, or how can this be done, or where there are some suppositions we're having to make here. And it makes me really excited for what's to come, because these conversations are absolutely not ending right now.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad that we both have more time, and I'm glad that I now have read all the books and I can explore some of these things that may contain spoilers for people who haven't read the entire series.
Well, Phil, are there any final things we need to say or discuss before we close out for this season and take just a little break here until we come back with season 8, Further Up and Further In?
I'm really grateful for the work that you put into this. I think that you did so much stuff, both in the scenes and behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of organization, editing, I think that this show is better because of the care and thought that you continue to put into it, but also your consistency. So thanks for doing that, and also for creating a forum to talk about these books, but then a reason to read them again and as an adult. But then this is just for me, I love that you got me to do illustrations.
Yeah.
For a specific thing with a deadline, because those are some really bright points in my portfolio.
That's great.
Kept it going. So thanks for doing all that.
There's kind of a season 8 artwork already. There's your own. I did not reject it because I loved it. Your rejected artwork, the original artwork for season 7, that I really want to use for season 8. But I also know that you might want to do some new things too, which is a problem because I love that artwork.
So yeah, the behind the scenes for that is, I usually make a version and I show it to Daniel and he goes, "This one looks good," and he preps it and everything, and then I do another round of thumbnails and sketches, and then I produce a final piece that I like better than the other one. So the other one you knew you wanted to use for season 8 as soon as I said I was switching it up.
Yes. And hopefully it'll stay there, but I could easily see you being like, no, I enjoy doing this. I want to do another one. Yeah. If listeners do want to see it, go to our website, lamppostlistener.com. It's there if you click on seasons. Under season 8, I do have the artwork posted. We'll see if it makes it to season 8 or not. Yeah. And you can also see, if again, I think we might have already mentioned this, but if you want to see the episodes that are coming your way, they're tentative, but they're mostly kind of all set in stone by this point. If you want to look ahead to season 8, we have tentatively about 18 episodes planned out, and they're all there. You can see what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be discussing.
Great.
So, Phil, I think it's time for us to wrap up and say goodbye and close this particular chapter of the Lamppost Listener.
And perhaps this is only the beginning. This episode and the entire last 3-4 seasons?
No, we've had Patrons in season 2. We started it in season 2. At the end of season 2, maybe?
The last 6 seasons have been made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. Everything before that we paid with cold hard cash, so we earned ourselves. If
it's whenever the audio changed. So
yeah, whenever it doubled in quality.
Whenever it stopped sounding like I was shouting in my closet, that's when Patreon started happening.
Also, big shout out to my grandparents and my aunt and my uncle and my parents for providing the funds necessary to upgrade our mics a little bit early.
That's true, yes.
So that we could at least have a better second half of season 1. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Ashton Washburn, and Andrew Trophy for supporting us at our top tiers. If you'd like to contact us, you can physically mail us something at P.O. Box 25854, Richmond, Virginia 23232.
And I'll say this real quick because now that we have a P.O. box and our contact information is changing a little bit as the show continues to grow, we can't answer all the emails we get. We try to we read all of them, and we try to read at least one every single episode. We just get so many that we can't always respond to them. However, Phil and I both love writing letters and spending time writing and working on our penmanship. So for people who do write us physical letters, we're always going to try our best to respond to you. Lewis, we know, felt like this was his obligation, and we feel like that's something that we also can do as well too. So we can't respond to all of our emails, but if you want to take the time to mail us a letter, you'll hear from one of us.
Yeah.
Is that a promise we can make? Do you think you're looking at me like maybe that's a little dangerous to say?
Sometimes Daniel comes up with an idea, and then I'm the one who fulfills the stuff.
You're making up for all the producing you don't have to do.
Oh yeah,
the scenes.
it is definitely still skewed more in your direction, but it's one of those things where it's like, wow, every season like we're getting more and more of this, or
yeah,
my hand's cramping up from all the letters we have to send out with stickers.
I think it'd be fun for us to do that. And I think if we don't say that on the show, we won't follow through. So we'll go ahead and say, if you want to write us letters, we would love to write you letters back.
I could see it being 3 letters a year. I could also see the show continuing to grow and like, why did we say that?
I mean, that's how Lewis felt, though. He hated the fact that he had to do it. So,
So why shouldn't we? No, I think it'll be great. And we would love to show off our fancy fountain pen inks that we
I've been doing the Diamine Inkvent calendar. So that's been a ton of fun. I opened a couple extra ones today because I keep it at work and I won't be at work over the weekend. Got some really great shimmer and chameleon inks too, which I don't usually buy those on my own volition.
It's
right?
kind of nice to have a little sample of it.
Yeah, I don't like the shimmer stuff, but I also went through my inventory. I now have over 50 inks to my name.
Wow.
Which is weird.
Most of his money's in ink.
There's a couple scented ones in there that not a fan of.
Oh man,
did you get some last year? Because you did the Inkvent calendar last year.
There was one that I filled up my favorite pen with, and then I kept writing with it, and I had to go empty it out because the smell just was too much.
See, I've been using I can't remember the name of it. I've been using Pilot's dip pen.
Mm-hmm.
Sailor has one too. Not your dog Sailor, but Sailor the fountain pen company. They have one too.
Now I have to change my bank security question.
Oh yeah, sorry. They have one too, and I've been finding with some of those shimmery, some of those chameleon or scented inks, that's better to use on a dip pen because I can easily wash it out as opposed to like filling my entire cartridge up or filling up if it's like a piston filling or vacuum sealing pen. Yep. I have to clean it out a lot more. I'm like, I wasted this.
It's interesting when I bought I used dip pens a lot for my early ink stuff, and now it's mostly digital, but I still have every single thing said do not use fountain pen ink with these. Just don't do it. Don't do it. It'll clog everything up.
But I wonder if these, because both, Sailor and Pilot are both, they make a ton of fountain pens, right? Mm-hmm. And I wonder if these pens are meant for fountain pen ink. Like these are relatively, I think both of these are newer offerings from their companies, like the last 5 years or so.
Oh yeah, that's very different.
So I wonder if they're like, hey, these are made for, because mostly I use just standard ink. I don't like all the sheen and the shimmer and all that stuff usually.
Yep.
But it is fun every once in a while, but not enough to fill up an entire pen, especially because I really like Twisbees, and that's all piston filling. It's a lot.
It's a lot of ink.
It's a lot of ink, and it's a lot to clean out and stuff. But But yeah, we'll use those on. They look beautiful, so maybe those are the ones we'll put. Why don't you do that P.O. box again, just one more time for listeners?
P.O. Box 25854, Richmond, Virginia 23232. In case you don't know how to scan backwards 2 minutes.
No, but it's still nice, whatever, fine.
Put it in the show notes too. We'll put it in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes too. Keep reading.
If you want to email us, you can email us at our new email.
Yes.
hello@lamppostlistener.com.
hello@lamppostlistener.com, which actually our first email came through. That was James's email. The one that I just read was our first listener email to hello@lamppostlistener.com.
And you may notice that we did that because we're no longer just the Narnia podcast.
Yeah.
Which was our old email, but now this is Lamppost Listener.
At thellamppostlistener.com.
And you can also call us at our legacy phone number, 406-646-6733. And if you punch that in, it spells out further up. Not really. That's not true at all. You can also find links to past guests, reference books, and other things at that website, lamppostlistener.com. Thanks for coming along on this journey, this entire journey. And we will be back next season as we prepare to go further up and further in.